The New York Mets may have lost the game, but they sure made the New York Yankees sweat as the Subway Series has come to an end.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. I've been covering the New York Mets on this show since the 2019 season. This is the only podcast that covers the Mets 7 days a week throughout the regular season. If you want to find some of my written work, you can do so over at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. We all just watched the ultimate house money game. The Mets went into this Subway Series with the odds stacked against them, and yet they won the first two games to take this series. And they were going up against Max Fried with a bullpen game. So the Mets had no pressure whatsoever to win this game. They were expected to lose, and they gave the Yankees a really good fight. Ultimately, it wasn't enough. You have to credit the Yankees for getting the job done, particularly on the defensive side of the game, with some plays in the later innings that we'll talk about in the next segment that really did stifle what would have been a pretty remarkable Mets comeback that very well could have been a sweep by this Mets team. But the Yankees end up getting one. They salvaged the series for themselves. For the Mets, though, I think we're starting to see the signs of this lineup turning a corner. And I think what they did, when you think about the challenge of the pitching injuries they've dealt with and where they were at for this series, not only, of course, was the Paul Blackburn injury, one that really loomed large in this series, taking one of your starting pitchers out, but even losing a Jose Buda, who had been so good for your bullpen, that was a lot for this team to overcome. And I don't think you hang your heads at all about losing a game. But let's go through the game recap. Chris Devanski got the start as the opener. He gave the Mets two strong innings, a really good sort of foothold to get into the game and maybe have a chance. He gave up a single in the first, had a 1-2-3 second inning, so he did a really good job for the Mets. Brandon Waddell, we thought was going to enter after Devanski. Instead, it was Zach Pop, and you see why Zach Pop probably won't be on this roster for too long. Gave up a solo homer in the third, then a double and a single to lead off the fourth inning, which put two runners in scoring position with nobody out. They would both score on some ground out. So the Mets were in a 3-0 hole before Waddell even entered the game, but he enters in the fifth inning with a chance to kind of get you deep into that game. And unfortunately, Aaron Judge tags him for a 2-run homer. So the Mets are in a 5-0 hole. But I think if you, again, consider all the circumstances, only being in a 5-0 hole through the first 5 innings was solid enough, I guess. And, Max Fried made it tough on the Mets. But then in that fifth inning, they made it tough on Fried. Started with Jeff McNeil getting a base hit. Then Hayden Sanger punches one into the outfield. And all of a sudden, the Mets have something cooking. I was thinking at the time, if the Mets can just rally long enough to get Fried out of this game after the fifth inning, they got a chance against the Yankees bullpen. That's pretty much what happened. Fried was at 78 pitches after giving up those two singles. I think it was with one out. Starling Marte, who had a great game, and we're going to talk about him to close out the show because it seems like he hurt his knee in that ninth inning. So that's something to discuss. But Marte was 3 for 4. He opened up the game with a bunt base hit out of the leadoff spot, stole second base. The Mets stranded him. Third inning, got a base hit as well. Played solid defense in left field even. Got to show off his arm a little bit, which is always a good sight when you see him just unleash that cannon. So it was a good game for Marte, and in that spot, he's able to get another hit. And so that puts the bases loaded for Francisco Lindor, who comes through with a single up the middle that scored 2. Fried at that point really had to buckle down after giving up 4 straight hits, and he's got a really tough matchup with Juan Soto, but he was able to strike out Soto. Pete Alonso hit the ball hard, but it ended up being a flyout. So Fried escapes the jam, having only given up 2 runs, but it took him 20 pitches really to get through that stretch. Hit Brandon Nimmo at the beginning of the 6th inning and then was pulled. So for the Mets to get into that Yankees bullpen in the 6th inning, that was a job well done by this offense against Max Fried, who has been so good this season. Now, Waddell pitched a 1-2-3 6th inning. So that was the point in the game where you felt like the Mets really had a chance when they put the 2 runs up on Fried, when they got him out of the game. And then you had this 6th inning where Nimmo again gets on base via the hit by pitch. They go to the bullpen, and Ronny Mauricio comes in to pinch hit for Mark Vientos. And Ronnie gets a base hit, second straight day, coming off the bench with the hit. Then you have Brett Beatty pinch hit for Tyrone Taylor. He gets a knock to load the bases. All of a sudden, the Mets are cooking, and it really felt like they were going to take over this game. Then they have a play where Yankees defense gives the Mets an opportunity. Jeff McNeil hits a nubber. Really tough play for the pitcher, Jonathan Loaizaga. Sort of run passes it, tries to get to first base. Goldschmidt tries to flip it to him quickly. Can't come up with it. Everybody's safe. Now it's 5-3. Mets are 2 runs away with the bases loaded and nobody out. And I think this was the moment where the Mets should have gone to Luis Torrens as a pinch hitter for Hayden Sanger. Instead, they let Sanger bat, and he hits into a double play ball that I feel like really snapped some of the Mets' momentum. If it wasn't for that double play ball, if Sanger instead hits a sac fly, who knows? Maybe it's a different inning. But instead, you score a run, you get 1 run closer, you're only a run away. But now, instead of being in a situation where before it was bases loaded and nobody out, you got a man on third base, 2 outs. And Starling Marte hits a line drive, Aaron Judge makes a diving catch. So, just those little things where the Mets couldn't quite get over the top in this game. I want to talk about the final innings, though, because the Yankees played just ridiculous defense. It started with that diving catch by Aaron Judge. Huascar Braziban gets through the next inning. And then you have another rally that got completely just tanked as Cody Bellinger made an unbelievable catch. I want to go through the final couple innings of this game in just a minute here. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Summer sports are in full swing. Whether you're all about baseball under the lights or golf on the green or high-stakes soccer action, FanDuel is the best way to make every game more exciting. You've already been following the action. Why not make it a little more thrilling? With FanDuel, you can get in on the game while your friends are getting sunburned at the beach. I've been using FanDuel to track my favorite matchups, and the app keeps it fresh with new daily promotions and fun ways to bet. It's easy to use, fast to pay out, and makes even regular season games feel like must-watch events. Whether I'm placing a same-game parlay or watching a bet right into the 9th inning, FanDuel makes it feel like I'm part of the action. If you're new to FanDuel, new customers can bet just $5. You get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Open the FanDuel app today or visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. If you're watching on YouTube right now, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. Help us get closer to our next goal of 14,000 subscribers. Now, when it comes to these final few innings, again, Huascar Braziban came on in the 7th, faced the top of the Yankees lineup, did give up a couple of hits, so he had runners at first and third when Aaron Judge came out to bat with nobody out. Judge gives one a ride, nearly hit a home run, but it ends up being a sacrifice fly. And then Braziban would strike out Giancarlo Stanton and Anthony Volpe, sandwiching a walk in the middle there, but got through that 7th inning without further damage. So the Mets are only trailing by 2, and they have a potential for a big inning in the bottom of the 7th inning. Francisco Lindor gets hit by a pitch. Juan Soto rips a line drive into left field. It looked like it was destined to drop in, and the Mets would have 2 guys on, nobody out. Instead, Cody Bellinger somehow gets that ball before it hits the grass and comes up firing and doubles off Francisco Lindor at first base. Really nothing Lindor can do. I know they said in the broadcast, I should have slid. Yes, he should have slid. Maybe he would have beat it. I don't know. I really don't know if the slide would have made that much of a difference. I think ultimately that's a play where Bellinger just made the perfect throw, and I think the throw would have beat him regardless. But 2 huge outs for the Yankees really knocked the Mets out of what could have been a big inning, because Pete Alonso would draw a walk after that. So the Mets could have had bases loaded, nobody out. Instead, runner at first with 2 outs. Brennan Nimmo grounds out, and that would be the end of the inning for the Mets. Rico Garcia went out there for the 8th, put up a scoreless frame. Mets again, though, get screwed over by a great defensive play by the Yankees in the bottom of the 8th inning, because you had Ronny Mauricio lead things off with a base hit. This one coming from the right side. We're going to be talking about Jesse Winker's return in the next segment. And I think Mauricio is playing himself into a role to stay on this roster. I'm at a point here, and it's something we'll be talking about over the coming days and weeks, but Mark Vientos really has to prove himself because both Brett Baty and Ronny Mauricio are out playing him right now. And Vientos doesn't have any options. So what does that, make the Mets have to do? It makes them have to consider trading Mark Vientos at the deadline to clear up a roster spot. And I think Vientos would still have some value after the big season he had last year. So you can maybe think about shipping Vientos for some type of a rental. Now you're giving up 4 years of control. So it'd have to be a high-end rental. We'll see. We'll see how that all works out. Again, that's a conversation for another day. We have a lot of time coming up here for deadline topics. And I'm telling you, I've been preparing a lot of great stuff. So stay tuned to future episodes of Locked On Mets, as we will be diving pretty deep into that whole side of the conversation of what did the Mets do at the deadline. But Mauricio, again, sets up a potential big inning. And then Brett Baty hits a hot shot to Paul Goldschmidt, who's a great play just to stop the baseball. Mauricio, one thing that you can say, he is lost on the bases. He is not a very good base runner. That's evident. He might steal a base here and there, but he's not a great base runner, which puts you in a weird spot with this roster when it comes to what the Mets do, because if Marte is fine and you call up Winker and you dump Jankowski to do so to keep Mauricio on the roster, who's running for you late in games? Because you could say Mauricio is probably the quickest option, but man, is he a bad base runner. I don't think it makes a difference if Mauricio does what he's supposed to on that play, which is just run towards second base, but he does make it very easy on Paul Goldschmidt, as I guess he thought it was a line drive catch instead of a ball that was hit on the ground. And so he was running back to first base, and that just allows Goldschmidt to tag him, touch first, and again, sort of get the Yankees out of any potential damage, because those double plays just really neutralized any threats from the Mets. Ninth inning, Luis Torrens strikes after a couple of brutal calls against Devin Williams. Carlos Mendoza gets ejected with only 2 outs left in the game, as he was not happy with those really terrible calls. If those had gone different, maybe Torrens gets on, but regardless, Devin Williams did a good job in that 9th inning. He gets Starling Marte to ground out, and then Francisco Lindor works a full count. Did actually have what would have been ball 4, where he could have got on in front of Soto and Alonso, which would have potentially set the stage if Juan Soto had drawn a walk, where all of a sudden it could have been Pete Alonso versus Devin Williams with the chance for Pete to really just send Devin Williams into a downward spiral. But none of that ends up happening, as Lindor could not check his swing on that full count pitch, and he strikes out to end the game. But overall, you look at this series, and really impressive for the New York Mets to take the first 2 games and then to make the Yankees sweat. Again, they had no business being in this game, with Max Fried going up against Chris Devanski, Zach Pop, and Brandon Waddell. Are you kidding me? And yet the Mets were right there. And a couple things go a little bit differently. If they pinch hit Luis Torrens, one at bat earlier for Hayden Sanger, and he hits a sacrifice fly, maybe the Mets are able to rally more in that inning. If Cody Bellinger doesn't catch that ball, and a game of inches, it hits the grass before his glove, and the Mets have runners at first and second for Pete Alonso, who again ended up drawing a walk. Could have been a completely different inning. Doesn't happen. If Aaron Judge doesn't make the diving catch the inning before that, Mets would have had another run there. So it was just a game where the Mets couldn't quite get over the hump. They really did threaten, and I think this is a great sign for this starting lineup, because you're seeing how much longer it can be when you start to get Brandon Nimmo contributing, Jeff McNeil, when Lindor is doing his thing from the top of the lineup. Obviously, you have Soto and Alonso in the middle, but now you're seeing Brett Baty and Ronny Mauricio give you really good at-bats, and that helps lengthen things. Jeff McNeil continues to give you good at-bats. That lengthens things. And on the other side of the break, you're probably going to get Francisco Alvarez back. So instead of having a Hayden Sanger up in that spot, you have Alvy. And yes, Alvarez has not had a great offensive season, but he's starting to lead the yard a bunch in the minor leagues. And in that spot, I still would want him up over Hayden Sanger. So there's these little things that'll make this team even better. But you look at where they're at the end of this week when they finished off this homestand. You beat the Brewers, you beat the Yankees, you go 4-2. That's a very good week of baseball for the New York Mets, coming off of the disaster that was last weekend against the Pirates. And now you look at the road ahead. You have 2 series against sub-500 teams in the Orioles and the Royals. And you're going to get some reinforcements too. Jesse Winker seems like he is going to be back. I want to talk about Winker's return and also the potential injury to Starling Marte and how that could impact the Mets' decision-making when it comes to rostering Winker. So we're going to go through all of that here in just a second. Thank you all for tuning into the show. If you're an everydayer that's tuning in, make sure you become a Locked On Mets insider. It's our texting service. You get updates from me. Anytime news breaks in the Mets, you can ask me questions anytime. Take part in our Locked On Mets sign photo giveaways. You get the lineup graphics at your phone each day, so you know who's in the starting lineup without ever having to go on social media. If you want to be a Locked On Mets insider, find the link in the episode description. Go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets. Now, Jesse Winker, it was reported before the game that the Mets were considering bringing Jesse Winker back on Tuesday if all went well in his final rehab game in Syracuse, or with Syracuse. I don't remember where they're playing right now. But Jesse Winker in the first inning hits a 2-run homer. So he says, hey, guys, I'm ready to come back. Great call by the Syracuse Mets broadcaster, how he hit that one to Queens, and Jesse Winker might not be too far behind. It was a blast of a home run, his second in 5 rehab games. And you look at what he did overall. He walked twice, went 1 for 3, and the 2 outs were well-struck fly balls. So Jesse Winker is ready to come back. That is what we know. The question is, who will he be replacing? The options. You could send down Ronny Mauricio or Brett Baty. And I'm going to start off by saying there's not a world where Brett Baty gets sent down. He's playing good baseball. He's giving you great defense at third base and second base. He's become too important to this team. He is not at risk at being optioned. Mark Vientos does not have any options. So the Mets are not going to be doing anything there, even though Ronny Mauricio and Brett Baty are outplaying Mark Vientos right now. Really, the decision comes down to one of 3 things. The first one is Starling Marte might have taken the decision out of the Mets' hands because in that 9th inning, he checks his swing against Devin Williams and he starts flexing his knee. And we know Starling Marte has bad knees. I mean, this is like a basketball player that has thousands of miles on him. I mean, Marte is the active leader in Major League Baseball in stolen bases, and his knees will tell you that. I mean, he has a lot of mileage on him, and I think the Mets have done a great job this year by keeping him as a DH, keeping him off his feet, and that's helped for whatever reason, and I never really saw an explanation. I'm sure maybe Cos Mendoza talked about it in the pregame, and I might have missed it, but they made a lineup change. It was going to be Brandon Nimmo on left and Starling Marte at DH. The last second, they decided to flip that and put Marte out there in the outfield, and he played a full game. I don't even know if Marte has played a complete game this year in the outfield. Let me check and see. I kind of feel like he hasn't, because typically he'll get pulled at some point when he's out in the outfield. He might play 5 innings out there. So it's, to me, not necessarily a coincidence that all of a sudden his knee comes up barking the first time he played a full game in left field this year. And let me, before I speak out of school, confirm that. But that's a potential big blow. And Marte has been swinging a really good bat for the Mets. And it was definitely, I think, very beneficial to have him, serving as just a DH. And so now you wonder, all right, what's going to happen here for Marte? I'm looking here. Let's see. He started a game in right field and played 5 innings. Another game here, right field, 7 innings. Yeah, so this is the first time that he's played a complete game in the outfield, and he hurts his knee. So that's not good. We'll see. That could make things really simple for the Mets, right? Jesse Winker activated, Starling Marte hits the IL. You could at that point obviously keep Mauricio. I'd imagine that your DH at that point is going to be Winker with most righties on the mound. Vientos, I guess, with DH with lefties on the mound. And you'd probably just play Ronny Mauricio at third base, maybe see if he can get that right-handed swing down, or Brett Baty. But that's where the Mets are likely going to be at. And we'll see. We'll see if Marte does go down, or maybe this is just some knee soreness for a guy that, again, is not used to being on his feet for 3 hours and just needs to ice up. And with an off day on Monday, maybe he's fine. If he is, and Marte does not need an IL stint, well, then you got a decision on your hands. And like I mentioned, really it comes down to one of 3 options. Either 1, Starling Marte hits the injury list. 2, the Mets send Ronny Mauricio down. Or 3, they end up getting rid of Travis Jankowski. When it comes to Jankowski's role, he's not playing much. He's just pinch running. The Mets can get rid of that function on their roster and be fine for a week or maybe a couple weeks if they want to just roll with this team until the deadline. I think at some point you want to have a guy on your bench that does the Jankowski role. We saw Acuna doing it for a long time. It's just good to have a roster spot dedicated to somebody that you can drop into a game to pinch run, because you never know when you just need that one run. And when you get Luis Torrens gets on first in the ninth inning to lead off a rally, you want to be able to go to a Travis Jankowski to run if it's a one-run game to potentially steal a base and score on a single. So I like having a Jankowski on this roster, especially because you don't have to start him ever. And so it allows you to not force feed the 13th guy on your roster when it comes to your position players starts. So I think it makes a lot of sense. At the same time, I don't think you could justify sending Ronny Mauricio down right now. The one sort of rationale behind it would be we want Ronnie to play every single day because we think he can be a big part of this team. But he's making strides developmentally in the big leagues. And I don't think you want to sap that. I really don't. So you probably do, again, dump Jankowski if it's not Marte going to the IL. And if that happens, you have to figure out how to play all these guys. Jesse Winker is going to soak up some more at-bats. How do you get Vientos, Beatty, Mauricio out there? Because you still have to see if Mark Vientos can snap out of this. Because if Mark Vientos got back to the guy that he was in 2024, I mean, you wouldn't need anything at the deadline. You wouldn't have to make a trade. I honestly think this team would be good because you're not going to find, as we'll again talk about more as we get to some of these deadline shows, but one of the things I want to talk about is what bat completes the Mets lineup at the deadline. And there's not a lot of good options in center field. If Jarren Duran is not traded, and there's really no indication that the Red Sox plan to be sellers beyond just getting rid of Devers, if Duran's not on the table, there's not a lot of good options in center field. I honestly believe Jeff McNeil in center is the Mets' best option this season. So if that's the case, you got to figure out second and third base. If Vientos was great, if Vientos was hitting, if Vientos was playing solid defense at third, all of a sudden that position is not a question. And then second base is up for debate between Mauricio and Beatty. I don't know if the Mets can go into the deadline and really trust that internally they're going to be able to have two of those three guys as starters come playoff time between Mauricio, Beatty, and Vientos. And so you need all of them to play. So it's going to be an interesting balance. And that's where the Mets might decide, you know what? Ronnie's been great. We think Ronnie is going to play a big role for us down the stretch. But what we want to do right now is get a full look at Mark Vientos. And we want Ronnie to just play every single day, to get to start against lefties, to work on his right-handed swing. You send him down with clear-cut developmental goals. Hey, we love what you did. We love what you showed. Go down, work on X, Y, and Z. You are going to be back. We believe in you, making an impact in the second half. And then you let Vientos try to hit his way out of it. And if he does, great. And if he doesn't, you're either making a move or you're trading him or you're bringing somebody in. Or if none of that happens, well, then maybe you bring Mauricio back up after a month of at-bats in AAA to get even more right. But again, I don't think that is the best thing for this team to win right now. I think that might be the best thing from an asset management point for the trade deadline. But for the New York Mets to win games, to win the series in Baltimore, to win the series in Kansas City, I think you need Ronny Mauricio on this roster. I think he is right now a above average left-handed bat who can play second base and third base at a good enough clip. He's not going to be a great defender. I think there's still going to be some mental gaffes at times, and we're seeing that on the bases as well. But he's a great athlete, and he's helping you win games. So I think at this stage, it makes more sense to get rid of Jankowski and just go without that pinch running option. Yes, it could be Mauricio, but he's so boneheaded on the bases. I don't even know if that's best, but you can just feel things out. Tyrone Taylor very well could fill that role. If Jeff McNeil is playing more consistently in center field, well, then that opens up Tyrone Taylor to do some more of those things as your fourth outfielder speed guy off the bench. You very well can go down that road. And if it just is one of those situations where everyone's got to run for themselves, everybody's got to run for themselves. I just don't think it necessarily makes sense right now to option Ronny Mauricio. I think he has played himself onto this roster for some time here. And you never know. If he keeps this up, that might allow you to be more patient with Mark Vientos in the sense that, this might not be Vientos' year. And that's okay, because if Mauricio and Beatty can hold it down, that could be second base and third base. you might be fine. You might not need much of Mark Vientos other than keeping him in the lineup for his left-handed pitching and hoping at some point it can connect. But for now, I think the Mets got to keep all the kids on the roster. And I think you just get rid of Travis Jankowski. Again, that's assuming Marte's health, because there's every chance that we just watch Starling Marte play a great game before an IL stint where he's going to need to rest up those knees for a little bit. And if that's the case, it makes your decision very easy. And it also frees up a little bit of playing time because Marte has been playing a good bit at DH. So that does give you some more at-bats to go around to Vientos, to Winker coming off the injured list and all that. But overall, a great weekend for the New York Mets. I don't want to lose sight of that as we sort of look ahead. There is a lot that I'm going to be covering on the show in the next couple of weeks. Tomorrow's show, we're going to talk a little bit about the All-Star, because at 5 o'clock at night, right now, I guess they're announcing who is an All-Star this year. Let me see. Did anybody know? Did we get any? Let me see if I can look really quick. Or I'll talk about it all tomorrow. I'm not even gonna worry about it for right now. We'll see. Pete Alonso can certainly be an All-Star. Edwin Diaz should be an All-Star. You can make the case that Juan Soto, after an incredible month to close things out, deserves to be an All-Star. Beyond that, I don't think the Mets will get any other pitchers. I don't think that you're going to see Kodai Senga on just because of the injury. You never know. I imagine that you're not going to see David Peterson make the All-Star. So I think it's going to be Diaz. Obviously, Lindor starting at shortstop. And then you got Pete Alonso. But regardless, we'll talk about that tomorrow. I'm also going to touch on which All-Stars the Mets could potentially target in trades. So that's going to be a fun show. And then we'll get into our final week of coverage before the break. And then once we get to the break, a lot of trade deadline topics. It's going to be a fun couple of weeks. This is the height of the season, I feel like, when it comes to just all that's up in the air with the All-Star break and the deadline right behind, or coming right after, and the draft. So just a fun time. I appreciate all of you who tuned into the live stream today, and all of you who are going to listen to the playback. As always, if you're watching on YouTube, hit that subscribe button. If you are listening, follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcast. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listener, your first watch every day, not for your second watch. Head over to YouTube and check out Locked On Sports Today, the first ever 24/7 streaming show that covers everything the world of sports, with insight from our local experts as well as our league-wide experts. Find Locked On Sports Today streaming 24/7 on YouTube.